There you go, right now, are we? Good, excellent. Okay, so I was talking to someone just recently and they said to me, "Oh, moderator, what a hard term you've had as moderator." And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Oh, it's been a really hard time." And I said, "I don't understand what you're talking about." And they said, "Oh, well, there was the drought and then there was the bushfires and then there was the COVID-19. And I said, "Well, yeah, but it actually isn't about how hard it's been for me. It's about people on the ground who are finding it the time difficult. I mean, by and large, it's been challenging for me. Of course it has. But for congregations, for community groups, it's been a really challenging time. And a couple of my articles I've written recently in pieces, I talk about arriving at the airport, at Sydney Airport, and there being nobody at the airport and the airport shops all being closed. And then my one plane now a day arrives at 11:30. I get a taxi and I'm the first fare for that taxi since 6:30 in the morning. And I get to the CBD in Sydney at Pitt Street, which has just changed a bit now, but in the last several months, you get there and there's no one at my cafe in Pitt Street. And you talk to the guy and you say, "How are things going?" "Oh, well, I'm trading insolvent. All my staff are on JobKeeper and I'm not paying any rent right now." And rent, where he would be paying rent, would be about $10,000 a week minimum. And you think, people are doing it tough. I live in Tamworth, as many of you know, and in Tamworth, by and large, it kind of sort of feels like normal. Kind of sort of feels that way. If you mention you're from Sydney, everyone goes, "Oh, that's nice." That's back. But by and large, in Sydney, it just doesn't feel that way in many parts of the CBD. So when we think about our congregations, and the congregations have had some real challenges, I'm not playing that down, and I'm sure you've already realised this, your communities are doing it tough in many ways as well, especially those small businesses. I can't understand how the small businesses in the Pitt Street building where Synod is, are going to recover. I do not know how they're going to recover. Sorry, they might. I'm not in small business. I'm just saying I don't know how they're going to. And I was saying before, and if the Prime Minister said, "Here's $1,000 to every member of lives in Sydney, go spend money at the coffee shop," they're not going to drive into the CBD and spend it. They'll spend it in their suburbs. And they're saying in suburbs and in country towns, a lot of cafes are doing really, really well because people are leaving Sydney and going there and spending their money there. So it's a challenging, one of the languages we hear is, I think, 2-speed economy. I think it's a 3 or 4 or 5-speed economy right now. And one of the speeds is the Sydney CBD and Melbourne CBD and London CBD and etc. It's a really challenging time. And I want to ask the question for us, what's it mean to be the church in that space? Of course, one of the challenges of the COVID-19 time is that it drives us inward. We think about ourselves and our survival, and I understand why we think that way, and it's not a bad thing to be aware of those things, but we aren't called to be saving ourselves. Our call is to be in mission in the world, and that's going to look different. And that's my second comment, scintillating comment, is I don't think COVID's created that many cracks for us in the church. I think it's revealed a lot of cracks because we haven't been able to paper over them or pretend they aren't there because suddenly we're exposed more than we were in the past. And that's challenging for us because a lot of our congregations have survived upon rentals or survived upon folks' generosity who've been turning up, and it's actually more difficult now. The congregation I left at Tamworth Southside, when I left, the offerings paid for the minister. That's a very rare occurrence in congregations across the church right now. And if you're relying upon rental, it's a challenging time for the church. And I'm not sure how aware you are, some of the rentals some Sydney congregations get are pretty flash, like $500,000 a year. I mean, there's serious dough now not coming in. So it's a real challenge for large parts of the church. And this brings me to my comment. I spoke at PLC for the year 11 and 12 the other day, and of course the schools are doing things vastly different. Their speech days, there are now 5 speech days for PLC rather than 2. Great, 5. Anyway, yay. And the year 11 and 12 speech day, and they asked me to speak briefly, and it was on the day after Remembrance Day, and it's NAIDOC week. So I talked about remembering, and I said, remembering can be a negative thing. It can be, oh, things used to be good and now they aren't. Things were wonderful then and now they aren't. Things were good last year and now they aren't. Or remembering can be, What are the strengths and the joys and the new things and the decisions that we made that actually give us life for the time ahead? How do we remember those things that actually gave us a new sense of community, a new sense of hope, new direction and new purpose for the years ahead? There's a hymn that Claire and I were talking about before. One of the hymns, I've got the number, you'll did not off by heart, number 6, 8 something. The last, it's a hymn about the Anzac Day and Remembrance Day. The last line says, remember forward to a world restored. The task of people of the gospel is to remember the story of God's action in the world, God's place in the world, God's purpose in the world, and how it means something for the future. It isn't just about then, it's about the future, about now and into the future. How do we remember forward those gifts God's given us for the future? Rather than saying, I remember the good stories from back then, what's it mean for us to be remembering forward where God will be into the future of the church? I want to thank you very firmly and very clearly for your faithfulness in this time, because it's been a difficult time, because things have changed. And I want to remind you, this is one of your remembering forward things. In the last 40 years, when we've asked you to change stuff, you've said, oh, well, mightn't be, oh, I don't know. We need to have a church council meeting about that. Well, we'd have to ask Frank. Well, I'm not too sure. And then when COVID happened, congregations changed in 10 days. Their worship, their pastoral care, their Bible study, people went massively online. People who didn't know how to open a computer were running Zoom meetings. My old man's 85, right? He's pretty shy, like me, pretty shy, and he had a Zoom birthday on March 31st, his first ever Zoom. So he Zoomed from around the state for Dad's birthday, and he talked basically from the beginning of his birthday till the candles blew out till the end. And he wrote the next day and said, I've discovered the mute button. And we said, we all discovered the mute button, Dad. So people changed immediately. And I want to say the greatest risk for you is to change back. Do not change back. Change forward. Take the things that you've learned because you had to learn them and hold them alongside the great gifts from the past. Take those things and hold them, because I want to say to you, some of the stuff from the past wasn't that flash. It really wasn't that flash. It might have felt comfortable like an old lounge, but they're hard to get out of old lounges. They really are. Okay? I want you to think, don't tell me now, I want you to think about, what have you gained and received because of the COVID-19 thing? What have you gained and received because of the COVID-19 thing? One thing I've gained and received, I've had pastoral contact with 165 ministers in the last 8 months, most of whom I wouldn't have had pastoral contact with if it hadn't been for COVID-19. I've sat for an hour or an hour and a half with a whole pile of ministers from across the synod who, because of COVID-19, we went online and did it. Now, don't ask me why I didn't do it before. I have no idea I didn't do it before. But a whole pile of ministers, most of whom were positive about the experience, engaged with me pastorally. That's something we've gained that if we hadn't had COVID-19, we would not have done. A second thing is, the synod leadership has met regularly with presbyteries to talk through how things are going. And most leaders of presbyteries and most leaders of the synod would say, we have the best relationship that we may have ever had with the synod and the presbyteries because of COVID-19. Because we meet together every 2 or 3 weeks, regularly. And we tell stories and we take different leadership and different purposes and different roles, and we've grown that. So they're just 2 simple things we've done through the blessing of Zoom. And I want to say blessing of Zoom was ironic. It really is driving me insane. But it actually has been a gift. But when you do wall-to-wall Zoom for 8 hours, the thrill diminishes exponentially. So before you ask some questions, what I want you to do is consider this story I've told before. When you work with cattle up a race, there's this metal bar called a hock bar. You whack in behind their back legs so they can't go backwards. They have to go forwards. In theory. Depends how big the beast is. I want you to be thinking about what are the hock bars in your congregation you need to put in place and in your presbytery. Because people will say, oh, thank goodness we haven't got a Zoom anymore. We can go back to sitting quietly in the corner at church. I live out of town in Tamworth, at Hallsville, about 20 houses around me, on 5 acre, 10 acre blocks. And everyone in our street knows each other and we get on pretty well by and large, right? I've buried a few, married a few, baptised a few, done the whole shebang, right? So COVID starts, right? And a couple, two houses up, who are friends of ours, whose kids went to school together, right? Ring me up. I've heard about this Saltbush church. Can I go to church? And I said, I was the minister around the corner for the last 5 years. What the hell? People over the hill, just over there. Stone's throw from my place. Oh, we're thinking about going to worship. Can we go to worship online? And I said, yeah. Why didn't you ask before? I don't know. So 2 couples are now regularly attending Saltbush Church, not my church, Saltbush Church, and are part of the worshiping community, not every Sunday, but regularly. And I think this is also what's happened because of COVID. People are engaging with the worship kind of thing, kind of stuff, deliberately when they weren't before, which is wonderful. A bit weird, but wonderful. I have people talking about running a worship service and 500 people watch online for a congregation of 75. What's that about? And I want to say to you, if you turn that channel off, that's a big mistake. That's a big mistake. I have young parents writing into me saying, we couldn't go to worship because our autistic son can't sit still in a space, but I can come to worship now because he can play in the lounge room or his room or whatever, and I can be online. And I want to say, the last thing, I'm going to keep talking, last thing. People have written to me more and asked this question more in the last 7 months about, oh, how do we make contact? How do we do this? How do we build disciples? How do we bring people to the faith? Why weren't you asking those questions for the last 40 years? You're asking them now, and you're worried about people being excluded from worship because of it's online. People weren't that actively worried before when we were all gathering in a space. So what's that mean for us? I'm not being critical, I'm critiquing us. What's changed? And a lot of those changes are really good changes. How do we hold those things, those new good things, and the old good things, and do them well together? And I want to suggest that one of the things might well be that places that are resourced, perhaps like Port, for example, might still be providing online stuff more regularly, or you build, and please don't quote me because I'll get in strife, a kind of virtual parish of shared video services. Don't call it a video parish. Don't do that. Don't do it. Because someone like, oh, parishes, wait a minute, they were really good. We love parishes. No. But that kind of thing of sharing resources together like we kind of sort of used to. The last comment, the fourth last comment, the last comment. COVID has shown where there are cracks in the ground. You can put seeds in cracks and water them. Okay, any questions you got, folks? I'll just blame Jane Fry in case you're wondering. Or Bronwyn Murphy. No questions? That's easy. Soft crowd, John. Yeah, John. Yep. Those who know me will know that my response to the elite private schools that we've had in the Synod, even though I went to one, has been a strugglesome one. And if you ever attended Synod Standing Committee or the old Council of Synod, there was often a fraught conversation, Ford and Holden conversation about private schools. And the private schools in the past had a fairly aloof relationship from the synod, and that's been difficult. I want to say now the relationship, for several reasons, one of which is COVID, is extraordinarily positive, really engaged, really willingly positive. And I don't mean they're trying to sell me something. I mean, they actually are actively wanting to engage with the church. We've now installed a new director of mission for the church, who's a colleague of mine who went through college with me. He's ordained. He's worked in schools for a long time as a chaplain and as a pastoral care teacher. He's now the director of mission, and their schools are paying for him. So we actually have a more formal relationship as well as a much more positive relationship. Because in the past, the difficulty we had often, if you got on, it was, of course, these people became friends. That's all well and good. When the friends move on, you haven't got the relationship anymore. We have both a good relationship and a good formal relationship with the schools as they move towards incorporation, which is a really positive thing for the whole church and for the schools. I did the speech there the other day. The head of school council got up and he said, for a good solid minute, how valuable it is to be part of the Uniting Church, named the reasons why and how proud he was to be part of the Uniting Church. And I thought, well, that's a good thing. So and John and I have walked this path for a long time together. That's a really good story to be able to tell. And it's echoed across every single school. Jeff.
Synod. Tell us about how Synod can work.
Smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
3 drops of the essence of terror. Milton the Monster Show, that was that from, wasn't it? Had my brain. Remember Milton the Monster Show? 6 drops of the essence of terror, 9 drops of sinister sauce. You remember that? Google Milton the Monster Show after the talk. While John's talking, Google that, okay? Okay, so one of the challenges that I tried to say in my first bit is we can't just cut and paste the past onto this. We can't just take a normal church service, cut it and paste it onto video or onto Zoom. You just can't do that. It just doesn't work. And you all know that it doesn't. You try things a bit differently. So we looked at Synod and we said, gee, 3.5 days sitting in front of a Zoom for 9 hours a day. Apart from the medication we'd sell, you can't really see an upside to that, can you really? So we said, what if we do it differently? So the Synod leadership is committed to producing 3 1.5-day Synod meetings over 5 months, with attending presbytery meetings before and between each of the Synod meetings to tell you what are the big proposals and have the conversations with you, anyone who wants to come at those meetings. Now, those might get a bit refined, but the idea being that when people go to the online Zoom, I'll use the word Zoom, it's not going to be Zoom, it's something else, the online Synod meeting, people will be already conversant on the topics and engaged. Anyone can watch, but only members of Synod can participate. And the idea being that apart from me being highly stressed and watching 3 things at once, everybody else is just going to be watching the screen and dealing with it that way. There'll still be a kind of worship, a different kind of worship. There'll still be Bible studies and input, and but there'll only be 2 big issues a day. So we're going to aim to do 6 over the 3 times. Now, the Synod staff are in conniptions because it's a phenomenal amount of work for them, but we think actually it's a great way of investing in the church, but also modelling to the church we have to do things differently. Now, people are saying we might have a vaccine by August next year. I'm not entirely convinced this isn't a better model anyway. This may in fact be a better model anyway. Because, I mean, seriously, for you folk, 3.5 days of me chairing a meeting on Zoom, seriously, you could find better things to do, couldn't you? But the principle behind it is we actually have more conversations with a wider part of the church, because one of the lines in the church is we aren't transparent. This shows and actually is more transparent. It engages with people in a different way online and makes you realise you haven't got to be there for 12 hours, 3 days in a row. And what it also does is we're working really hard on the idea of satellite synods. So you can do it in your lounge room if you want to. I'm going to pick on Port Macquarie because it's convenient. But you also might gather 30 or 40 of you in this room have Synod on that screen, have your own screens as well, and so you can run it as part of a... When we break the breakout groups, we can do it in this room as well. That's the conversation we're trying to have. If any of you went to the Queensland Synod, I'm sure most of you didn't do that, went to Queensland Synod, they just did it like a normal synod for 3.5 days and sat there, and I'm reliably informed people were carried out of the room gibbering. So, including the moderator. So we aren't going to do it that way. Now, to apply the sermon to the synod meeting, it might not work. It might not work. But I don't want to die wondering. This is the opportunity to try something new. We have big stuff to discuss at Synod, big stuff to discuss. We want to discuss conversations around assisted dying. We want to have conversations around growth and mission. We want to have conversations around a missional plan for the church, for the Synod. We want to discuss how we're caring for our young people and growing those issues. We want to have those conversations and actually have them. Because as you know, at any long meeting, towards the end, you're all thinking, orange card, orange card, orange card, orange card. Let's just get home. Okay, and I think we're strongly trying to avoid that. But it will mean a commitment from your presbytery and from anyone going to Synod to be at those engagements, but we're trying to make them as enlivening as we possibly can. In the end, we have to have a smaller number online because chairing a meeting of 400 people online, anyone who tells you it's easy is lying to you. I've chaired a meeting of 40 online and that's hard enough. 250 will do me. I think 260 we're aiming for at Synod. People will say, oh, you're reducing the numbers. No, we're not, because you can come to the pre and between meetings and be engaged that way if you want to. And we also think perhaps more folk will come to those meetings because they wouldn't have gotten a car and gone to Sydney, but they'll come here or Coffs or Grafton or wherever we're going to be meeting. Does that sound all right? Okay.
Just to encourage us on Healthy Church Expo,
Hmm?
we have far bigger take up from our congregation than went online. One subject is
Yep.
whatever.
Yep.
Rather than buying into a car and going down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, economically, for the church, for the Synod's sake, it's a much better way of going, and it's going to cost us far less money. That isn't the driving issue. It's a side product, but what it means is we can invest some money in there being a better process. But far more importantly, we think it's probably a better way of meeting. Now, speaking as a rural introvert, I want to say that I like going to Synod before I was moderator and meeting people, having coffee, going to the pub, having lunch, that sort of stuff, and then go to the occasional bit of the meeting. I quite like that. Not being able to do that will be a bit more difficult, but we have to work out other ways of doing that stuff. Thanks for that, Jeff. Claire.
You mentioned assisted dying.
Yep.
We had the great news about the rehabilitation centre in Dubbo.
Hmm.
What are the big conversations that the rest of the world is wanting to have with the United Church and
At the moment, you're aware that there are, often with the church, what we actually are doing is having conversations. Rather than saying, we think this, therefore, we're saying, we've had this conversation, you want to talk to us. So last year we had conversations about the drug rehabilitation stuff, the Fair Treatment campaign, which, as you know, is about decriminalisation of drugs, not legalisation, decriminalisation of illegal drugs. The idea being that we know from evidence, from police, from doctors, from lawyers, that the best way of treating a drug addict is to care for them rather than to put them in prison. Hold them accountable, absolutely, but putting them in prison makes them more effective drug dealers, more addicted to harder drugs, and ends their life. We know that. There's no stat that proves that otherwise. The question is, how do we do it well? The answer is, you talk to experts about it, like the 60 groups that have signed on with us, doctors, lawyers, health professionals, police. And when the head of the federal police says, this is a really good thing, when the ex-head of the DPP says, this is a really good thing, then you think it's probably a good thing. It's a hard conversation and it's an emotional conversation, but it's also an important conversation to be part of. We're also involved in conversations about the voluntary assisted dying. Voluntary assisted dying, or euthanasia, it's been called more loosely in the past, is a really, really, really important conversation. And right now, there is no plan to do anything about it in New South Wales, which gives us space to have a conversation rather than being forced to have one. And what might surprise you in the church is that we have about the same response to euthanasia as the community does, which might fool you, surprise you. Right? So we want to have the conversation in the church that isn't based upon, oh, my grandma was dying and this is what happened to her. That's a really important conversation, but it's an emotional one. It isn't actually the conversation we need to be having. We need to have doctors and experts come in, and I want to say very clearly, at the moment, I'm disposed quite firmly against the idea of that, but I think I'm in the minority in the church at the moment. But we need the conversation so the church can say, whenever it comes up legally, we can say, we've actually had the conversation in congregations and presbyteries and synod, and we now have a better idea of how we think about these things. And part of the challenge is, like a lot of things, like same-sex marriage, it's an emotional argument, quite appropriately, but it's emotional because when my mum died, she died peacefully and quietly at home in palliative care, and her life ended at peace at home. People who haven't had that experience think very differently about assisted dying than I do. Why? Because it's an emotional conversation. We want to try, and as much as we can, to have the broader and the deeper conversation at Synod, not to resolve anything, but simply to have the conversation. Religious reform and religious freedom has been a conversation which we've been involved in, and we think, to paraphrase a friend of mine, there are hairs all over it. We think it's a poorly drafted bit of legislation. We think when it's designed by a person from one nation, there's usually a string attached, which might lead to a grenade. We're highly concerned about that. So I spoke to a parliamentary committee just a few weeks ago about that, including the mover of the proposal. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. But the response from the community has been very positive, because it's all very well and good when a very powerful church like the Uniting or the Anglican or the Catholics say, we're really worried about our power. They're worried about their power. I listen to the Muslims and the Jews and the Aboriginal communities, to the smaller groups who are saying, whenever somebody mentions religious freedom, we think ours is about to be impinged. That's what it sounds like to us. A friend of mine would say, when a new law comes in, ask the weakest and the poorest and the women what's happening for them, and then you'll find the answer. Don't talk to the white middle-aged blokes. They're the ones you shouldn't be asking about it. At the parliamentary inquiry, there was a series of quite rigorous questions. There were three of us, a guy from the Jewish Board of Deputies, a guy from Multicultural Australia, and myself. And at one point, the guy from the independent member of Sydney, Alex Greenwich, said to me, tell me about how the Uniting Church welcomes all kinds of people. So I got to speak for a minute and a half about how the church welcomes all kinds of people. He said, I'm really proud of the Uniting Church, and moved on. So I want you to know, people notice how we're trying. People notice how we're trying to be witness in the community. I mean, it was a softball question deliberately, but he wants people to know we aren't just some sort of group trying to make a noise. We're actually trying to make a difference. And you mentioned in the community, Wayside Chapel, Exodus Foundation, Wesleyan Mission, people go, oh, you're them. I said, no, they're us. But it's important. I mean, it's important to say these really good things you value are actually us. And we're certainly in this conversation. Am I going too long, John? Okay, right. Right. Anything else you want to know, folks? Okay. Can I just say once again, thank you for the work that you've done, the way you've served, the way you've cared, the struggles you've endured. Thank you for your careful and thoughtful responses to the rigorous challenges of the stuff we're sending out. We're fully aware as we try to find a way of wording the government documents helpfully that you're all thinking, oh good, another email from the Synod. But I'm sorry about that, but that's part of the difficulty. And occasionally people who are quite reasonably losing their patience say to us, why have you sent this to us? And the answer is because the government sent it to us. That's the great challenge for us. And I want to tell you, if you want to get confused, go to a moderator's meeting where they're saying in different states there are different rules. That's always a hoot. But so thank you for your faithfulness and for your care and for your concern for people. And I heard the op shop being closed down and the ones being opened up and that sort of stuff. Tamworth City near me, they've closed their op shop down, and that's a big blow, not for the finance, that was very nice to have the finance, for a whole pile of people who know their mission in the church, and that was it. And I wanted those same folk are on the Red Cross group, the CWA group, who also have been closed down in this time, and they're grieving. It isn't a matter of we had a job to do. They're trying really hard to be in the community, and that's one of their best ways. And we're aware of that pain as well. And I want to thank you too, just for being a faithful witnesses and disciples in the church, and the way in which that's been carried out is really hopeful for us in the Synod. And please let it be assured that we're praying for you and thinking of you often, and we're doing what we can for you as well. Thanks, guys.